Welcome back, Sebastian here. Time for my power rankings for the 2024 Formula 1 Chinese Grand Prix. So starting right away, we're going to go with number 20, and that is Lance Stroll. So for Stroll, out-qualified in both the sprint qualifying session and the main qualifying session. Technically beat Alonso in the sprint, but that's because Alonso retired in the pits at the end. And of course, made that very clumsy mistake under the safety car, completely misjudging his braking point and getting an Aussie strike in the process. And yeah, I could have gotten a couple of points, I felt, without that error there. So yeah, definitely a pretty rough weekend all around for Stroll. Number 19, I'm going to go with the other driver, starting with S, and that is Logan Sargent. For Sargent, out-qualified both sessions, started 20th on the grid both times, was beaten in both the sprint and the main race, the main Grand Prix, by his teammate Albon as well. Not a whole lot to write home. Of course, for quite a few of the drivers on the grid, this was their first Chinese Grand Prix, but still not a great weekend all around for Sargent. Number 18, I'm going to go with Kevin Magnussen. So for Magnussen, it's a bit of a tricky one. He actually split qualifying with his teammate Nico Hülkenberg and beat Hülkenberg in the sprint, finished 10th in the sprint. So if that was the result for the main Grand Prix, he would have gotten a point. But unfortunately in the main Grand Prix, made that clumsy mistake, colliding with Tsunoda at turn 4 after the safety car. I don't think points were ever on the board, but the pace was just not really there in that race. But anyway, regardless, clumsy mistake by Magnussen, so I've kind of punished him accordingly in my power rankings. For number 17, I'm going to go with Yuki Tsunoda. Easily his worst weekend of the season so far, but that being said, the other 4 weekends have been pretty good. Out-qualified by Ricciardo both sessions and beaten by Ricciardo in both the sprint and the Grand Prix. Of course, first time at this track. This is the first actually, it's going to be the only new track for him this year. And of course, it's one of Ricciardo's better tracks. But still, yeah, not a great weekend for Tsunoda all around, and he'll be hoping for a bounce back in Miami. Number 16, we have Pierre Gasly. So for Gasly, split qualifying between himself and Ocon, so that's an improvement. Has been out-qualified by Ocon in every session before this. Of course, it was the sprint session, so when I do my look at all of the stats, that won't appear, but nonetheless, and then in the sprint, beaten in the sprint and the Grand Prix, so not a great weekend for Gasly. And I think he's definitely had a pretty poor start to the season, especially compared to last year. And being out of contract, he's going to want to turn that form around if he wants to have potential options outside of Alpine. And if things go really off the rails this season, I could see a situation where perhaps they entertain the thought of replacing him with Jack Doohan, just maybe. Number 15, driving at his home race, is of course Zhou Guanyu. So for Zhou, out-qualified both times by Bottas, but not by huge margins, especially in the sprint. Got himself into the sprint Q3 as well, which is a great achievement. Beat Bottas in the sprint, finished 9th, one spot outside the points, very, very close to points. In the Grand Prix itself, not as good. Basically was one of the last drivers on the road, if you ignored all the drivers who got penalties. But still, for Zhou, it was not a terrible weekend, but it was, I do feel like there were other drivers in that bottom pack who had better weekends. Number 14, I'm going to go with Oscar Piastri. For Piastri, out-qualified both sessions, beaten in the sprint and beaten in the Grand Prix. I feel like it was a bit of a learning session, like many of the drivers for whom it was their first race at this track. But nonetheless, got points in both the sprint and in the Grand Prix, which is really the best he could have hoped for. A bit unlucky at the end of the Grand Prix with picking up damage from the Stroll bowling incident. But still, for Piastri, I did feel like he was quite a bit off the pace of his teammate Norris this weekend. Let's see, number 13, number 13, I'm going to go with Esteban Ocon. For Ocon, a pretty solid weekend, split qualifying with his teammate Gasly, and then beat him in both the sprint and in the Grand Prix. Unfortunately, no points this weekend for Ocon. Still 0 points on the board for Alpine total. But he definitely has looked like the better of the two Alpine drivers. And maybe Audi will coming in a couple of months. But yeah, we never know. But so far, so good for Ocon in 2024. Number 12. Number 12, I'm going to go with Carlos Sainz. For Sainz, split qualifying with his teammate Charles Leclerc, but was beaten in both the sprint and in the Grand Prix. For Sainz, of course, got caught up in that incident in the sprint with Alonso. Probably picked up a bit of damage there. We know Alonso got damaged as well. I do think it's a bit of a 50-50 on both of their parts. I think when you have that kind of contact, you always have to be very careful. And I think reality is it compromised both of their races. In the Grand Prix, never really seemed to have the pace that Leclerc did. And yeah, I think felt like it was one of the first weekends this year that he's raced. Of course, he didn't race in Saudi Arabia, but one of the first weekends this year where he just felt a little bit more off the pace of his teammate Leclerc. Number 11, I'm going to go with Daniel Ricciardo. Of course, Tsunoda had one of the weaker weekends of the season, but Ricciardo, easily the strongest weekend of the season. I think it is also quite unfortunate how it ended, basically race being ruined by Stroll. Might have been able to get a point or two there at the end. Hulkenberg, of course, ultimately picked that point up. But for Ricciardo, definitely a really strong weekend. Out-qualified Tsunoda both sessions and beat Tsunoda in both the sprint and in the race. Alright, moving into the top 10. Number 10, I have Valtteri Bottas. For Bottas, out-qualified Zhou in both qualifying sessions. Really good pace there. And then but unfortunately, in the sprint and in the Grand Prix, of course, in the Grand Prix didn't finish the race. Sprint finished behind Zhou, but nonetheless, really strong pace throughout the weekend. Definitely the most comfortable he's looked so far this year, and yeah, comfortably ahead of Zhou as well. So that's always good to see. All right, number 9. This is going to be a tricky one. So I put Lewis Hamilton in 9th. If there was no sprint this weekend, Hamilton would easily be in the bottom 10, maybe even bottom 5. But he did get quite a few points in the sprint. Excellent performance in sprint qualifying. In the sprint, held on for as long as possible. And then in the Grand Prix, recovered to 9th place, which is about where I thought he might have gone. I did feel like his recovery was a bit slower than I expected. So yeah, it's a tricky one. Obviously, did very well in the sprint. Race, not so great. Race was alright, but qualifying was definitely very, very poor. So it's really hard to kind of average those out to a kind of a more meaningful score. But for Hamilton, it was an alright weekend. But that being said, the qualifying struggles, as well as kind of struggles with understanding the car, is something that he's definitely going to want to get on top of as we progress through 2024. And yeah, for Hamilton, split qualifying with Russell, and then obviously he beat him in the race. Speaking of Russell, that's the driver who I've decided to put in, in 8th place. So for Russell, split qualifying and then beat Hamilton in the Grand Prix. For Russell, not a whole lot to add. He kind of kept out of his way. Was by himself for most of the racing this weekend. Didn't seem to be behind that McLaren Ferrari group, but of course well clear of all of the other drivers. Just kind of did his own thing and picked up good points at the end of the Grand Prix. For number 7, number 7. Have I forget? I feel like I've forgotten someone. No, have I forgotten? No, I have not forgotten anyone. Let's see. Yeah. Oh, I did forget someone. Yes, I did. Oh dear. Okay, so going in between Sainz and Ocon, Sainz and Ocon is going to be L1. That's not great. Okay, so we have L1 here in 12 and a half. For L1, I think decent weekend. I think Williams had a lot of trouble setting the car up, and the pace wasn't really there for Williams. But did what he had to do, beat his teammate Sargent in both qualifying sessions and in the sprint and in the race. Of course, no points on the board for Albon this year, but still, I think he's kind of doing what he needs to be doing, which is solidly beating Sargent week in and week out. Alright, moving back up to where we were supposed to be. So I guess we're going to just remove 7 there. And we're going to just go straight up to 6. For 6, I'm going to have Sergio Perez. For Perez, alright weekend I felt. Didn't out qualify Verstappen and didn't beat Verstappen in either of the races. But that being said, I did feel like it was a solid weekend. The sprint recovered well enough, got himself on that podium, was really opportunistic, racing Alonso and Sainz and picking up the pieces of their scrap. But in the race, I do feel like he should have finished second in that race, given how dominant the Red Bulls were. He did say it was bad luck, but the reality is there's a lot of situations where you can make your own luck, and I think that if it was a faster driver, a driver perhaps like Verstappen, was in that position, I think Verstappen would have been able to overtake Norris and reclaim that P2. But yeah, unfortunately for Perez, the pace wasn't really there at the end of the day on Sunday. Saturdays have been much better in terms of qualifying, much closer than last year, but that being said, it's been very consistent, the gap, except for Japan. All of the main qualifying sessions have been about 3/10 gap between Verstappen and Perez, which is honestly what he needs to be doing. Number 5, I'm going to go with Fernando Alonso. For Alonso, beat Stroll twice in qualifying and then beat Stroll in the Grand Prix sprint. Obviously, there was the incident that Alonso got caught up in. But that being said, Alonso I felt had a really strong weekend, particularly in qualifying. Really good pace, both qualifying sessions, qualifying third, both times. I felt like the strategy that Aston Martin had in the Grand Prix was really poor, but Alonso made the best of it and picked up as many points as he possibly could. Number 4, I'm going to go with Nico Hülkenberg. So for Hülkenberg, split qualifying with his teammate Magnussen, but kind of finished best of the rest, got that crucial 1 point in the Grand Prix. So he'll be really happy with that. Really solid pace, really solid strategy. Basically, he's looked good in pretty much all of the sessions except for the sprint, where for whatever reason his car was just falling down the order as if it was 2023 all over again. But nonetheless, yeah, really strong weekend for Hülkenberg. Looked really good this weekend. Number 2, number 3. Yeah, I don't want to get my numbers mixed up again. Number 3, we have Charles Leclerc. So for Leclerc, split qualifying with Sainz, and then beat Sainz in both the sprint and in the race. Much better performance for Leclerc. Really felt like Ferrari, for whatever reason, didn't nail the setup like they had in previous races. But nonetheless, a really good performance from Leclerc this weekend, but albeit no podium, and that's something that he's definitely going to be wanting to get back on in the coming races. Alright, so we have number 1 and number 2. I feel like if the performance in the sprint, basically if that first lap in the sprint did not happen, I think number 2 and number 1 would be switched. But unfortunately for Lando Norris, who I put in number 2, I do feel like he cost himself quite a few points with that mistake on the opening lap of the sprint. Dropped himself from basically pole position. He was going to be P2 behind Hamilton, down to P6 and well off of the podium. The performance in the sprint qualifying in the Grand Prix were excellent. Really good performances there. An excellent race pace, something, and basically looked like he was matching Perez in the second half of that Grand Prix. In what we know is a better car. So yeah, really strong performance by Norris yesterday in the Grand Prix. And yeah, basically that only blemish is the start of the sprint, which of course leaves number 1 as Max Verstappen. Yeah, it was very close to being the other way around, but like I said, I do feel like that mistake at the start of the sprint was costly for Norris, and I think ultimately that's why I have them in this order. For Verstappen, another excellent weekend, out-qualified Perez in both qualifying sessions, beat him in the sprint, beat him in the Grand Prix. Got another win, got another pole position, not a whole lot more to add, controlled the pace of the race. Good comeback in the sprint from P4 on the grid. In the opening laps, wasn't really gaining that much ground on Alonso or Hamilton, but basically as soon as that tire offset was there, as soon as he got that tire, the advantage there, he basically just picked them off picked off Alonso and Hamilton pretty easily, took the lead, and then led comfortably home from there. So there you go. There's my power rankings. Of course, if you're skipping to the end, you're probably confused about why Albon is 12th and a half, and why there's no one in 7th. But long story short, I'm too tired and I can't look at my sheet properly. So there you go. There's my power rankings for the 2024 Chinese Grand Prix. Thank you so much for watching. Goodbye.